Captain Sarah Ghost Martinez adjusted her helmet one final time as she approached the sleek Apache helicopter sitting on the tarmac at Fort Hood. The morning sun cast long shadows across the airfield, and the familiar smell of jet fuel and hot metal filled her nostrils. Today was different from her usual training missions. Today, she would be flying with Lieutenant Colonel James Hawk Thompson, a decorated pilot with over 20 years of experience and a reputation for being one of the toughest instructors in the entire Army aviation branch. Sarah had earned her call sign Ghost during her first deployment in Afghanistan, where her ability to appear out of nowhere and strike with deadly precision had become legendary among her squadron. She was one of only a handful of female Apache pilots in the entire military, and she had fought tooth and nail to earn every bit of respect she commanded. At 28 years old, she had already logged more combat hours than pilots twice her age, but today felt like she was starting all over again. The Apache AH-64 stood before her like a mechanical predator, its twin engines silent but ready to roar to life. The gunship was a marvel of modern warfare technology, capable of carrying Hellfire missiles, 30mm chain guns, and enough firepower to level a small building. Sarah had flown these birds in the mountains of Afghanistan and the deserts of Iraq, but flying with Thompson would be her biggest test yet. Martinez! Thompson's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. He was walking toward the helicopter with the confident stride of a man who had seen everything the military could throw at him. At 45, Thompson was built like a linebacker, with graying hair at his temples and eyes that seemed to see right through people. Ready for some real flying today? Sarah snapped to attention. Yes, sir. Ready to learn from the best. Thompson stopped in front of her and studied her face for a long moment. I've read your file, Captain. Impressive combat record. But today we're not playing war games with insurgents hiding in caves. Today we're going up against the Red Team, and they're flying the newest experimental aircraft the Air Force has been working on. They think their fancy new toys can outmatch an Apache in the right hands. The Red Team was an elite group of pilots who specialized in testing new aircraft and tactics against established military systems. They were known for their aggressive flying style and their ability to push both machines and pilots to their absolute limits. The aircraft they would be facing today was classified, but rumors suggested it was some kind of next-generation fighter with capabilities that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Sir, what exactly are we up against? Sarah asked as they began their pre-flight inspection. Thompson smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. Something that shouldn't exist, according to everything we know about aerodynamics and physics. The boys in the labs have been working on this project for 5 years, and today is its first live combat test. With the opposition force. They moved around the Apache methodically, checking every system, every bolt, every piece of equipment that could mean the difference between life and death once they were airborne. Sarah had performed this inspection hundreds of times, but she forced herself to be extra careful. Flying with Thompson meant there was no room for even the smallest mistake. The mission is simple, Thompson continued as they climbed into the cockpit. We defend this airspace against whatever they throw at us. Intel suggests they'll be testing multiple attack patterns, trying to find weaknesses in our response capabilities. Our job is to prove that experience and skill can overcome any technological advantage. Sarah settled into the front seat of the Apache, where the weapons systems and targeting equipment surrounded her like the bridge of a spaceship. Thompson took the rear seat, where he would handle the primary flight controls. The Apache's tandem seating arrangement meant they would have to work together perfectly, communicating constantly and trusting each other completely. Have you ever flown against experimental aircraft before, sir? Sarah asked as she began powering up her systems. Once, Thompson replied, his voice becoming serious. About 10 years ago, they had us test against some stealth prototype. Nearly got myself killed that day. The thing could disappear from radar completely, and by the time you saw it with your own eyes, it was too late to react. Learned a valuable lesson about respecting technology you don't understand. The Apache's engines began to spin up, filling the cockpit with the familiar whine of turbines reaching operational speed. Sarah felt the helicopter come alive beneath her, every system responding to her touch like a living creature awakening from sleep. This was where she belonged, where all the years of training and combat experience came together into something greater than the sum of its parts. Control Tower, this is Apache 77, requesting permission for takeoff. Thompson spoke into his headset. Apache 77, you are cleared for takeoff. Proceed to testing area Bravo Charlie for your mission briefing with Red Team Control. The helicopter lifted off the ground with the smooth power that only came from perfectly maintained military equipment. Sarah watched the altimeter climb as they rose above the airfield, the landscape spreading out below them like a detailed map. Fort Hood stretched for miles in every direction, its training areas and facilities designed to prepare soldiers for every possible combat scenario. As they flew toward the designated testing area, Thompson began explaining the finer points of defensive flying against unknown aircraft. The key is not to assume anything about what you're facing, he said over the intercom. Every aircraft has limitations, even the experimental ones. Your job is to find those limitations and exploit them before they find yours. They've been flying for about 20 minutes when the first radio transmission came through from Red Team Control. Apache 77, be advised that Red Team aircraft is now airborne and proceeding to your location. Estimate contact in 15 minutes. Copy, Red Team Control. Apache 77, standing by. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she scanned her instruments and checked her weapons systems one final time. The Apache carried a full loadout of training munitions, non-explosive rounds that would register hits on target aircraft without causing actual damage. In a real combat situation, those same weapons would be deadly, but today they were playing an elaborate and dangerous game of tag at 300 miles per hour. Remember, Martinez, Thompson's voice came through her headset. This isn't about winning or losing. This is about learning what this new aircraft can do and how we can counter it. Pay attention to everything. Its flight patterns, its capabilities, its limitations. Every piece of information could be crucial in a real combat situation. The minutes ticked by slowly as they maintained their patrol pattern over the testing area. Sarah found herself constantly scanning the horizon, looking for any sign of movement that might indicate the approach of their opponent. The Apache's radar systems were among the best in the world, but she had learned never to rely entirely on technology when her own eyes and instincts might spot something the machines missed. Then, Thompson's voice cut through her concentration like a knife. Contact. 2 o'clock high, approximately 5 miles out, and closing fast. Sarah immediately turned her attention to the designated area and felt her breath catch in her throat. What she saw defied everything she thought she knew about aircraft design and capabilities. The object approaching them wasn't shaped like any airplane she had ever seen. It was sleek and angular, with no visible wings or conventional control surfaces. It moved through the air with an almost liquid grace that seemed to mock the laws of physics. "Sir, what exactly am I looking at?" she asked, her voice betraying none of the amazement she felt. "Something that shouldn't be able to fly," Thompson replied grimly. "But there it is, and it's coming straight for us." The experimental aircraft was closing distance at an incredible rate. Sarah's training kicked in automatically as she began calculating intercept courses and targeting solutions. But something about the way the craft moved made her conventional tactics feel inadequate. It didn't fly like anything she had ever faced before. "It's not showing up properly on radar," Sarah reported as she watched her instrument struggle to maintain a lock on the target. "The signature keeps shifting, like it's somehow changing its radar cross-section in real time." "Adaptive stealth technology," Thompson muttered. "I was hoping they hadn't cracked that particular problem yet." The enemy aircraft suddenly changed direction without any visible maneuvering, as if it had simply decided to be somewhere else. Sarah watched in amazement as it executed a turn that should have generated enough G-forces to kill any human pilot, yet it maintained perfect control throughout the maneuver. No pilot, she realized suddenly. It has to be unmanned. No human being could survive those kinds of forces. That changes everything, Thompson said as he began evasive maneuvers. We're not fighting another pilot. We're fighting a computer, and computers don't get tired, don't make mistakes, and don't feel fear. The experimental aircraft was now close enough that Sarah could see details of its construction. The surface seemed to shift and change color as it moved, adapting to the light and background like some kind of technological chameleon. No wonder their radar was having trouble maintaining a lock. Engaging target, Sarah announced as she brought her weapons systems online. The Apache's 30mm chain gun swiveled toward the approaching craft as her targeting computer struggled to achieve a firing solution. But every time she thought she had a lock, the target would shift slightly, just enough to throw off her calculations. The experimental aircraft suddenly accelerated beyond anything Sarah had thought possible. One moment it was 5 miles away, and the next it was streaking past them at what had to be several times the speed of sound. But there was no sonic boom, no shock wave, nothing to indicate that it had broken the sound barrier. How is that possible? Sarah asked as she tried to track the craft's movement. Nothing can move that fast without creating a sonic boom, unless it's somehow manipulating the air around it, Thompson replied as he threw the Apache into a sharp turn to keep the target in sight. Advanced flow control, maybe some kind of electromagnetic field manipulation. The theoretical papers have been floating around for years, but nobody thought it was actually possible. The experimental aircraft had completed its high-speed pass and was now circling back toward them at a more conventional speed. Sarah could see that it was deliberately slowing down, as if it wanted to engage them in a more traditional dogfight. Maybe the computer controlling it was programmed to test different combat scenarios. Here it comes again, Thompson warned as the craft lined up for another attack run. This time it's coming in slow and steady. Maybe we can actually engage it properly. Sarah readied her weapons systems as the experimental aircraft approached. This time she was able to achieve a partial lock with her targeting computer, and she prepared to fire a burst of training rounds. But just as she was about to pull the trigger, something unexpected happened. A sound came through the radio that made both pilots freeze in amazement. It was laughter, clear, musical, and unmistakably human. But it wasn't coming from their radio or their aircraft. It was somehow coming from the experimental craft that was supposed to be unmanned. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her fingers still poised over the trigger. "Yeah," Thompson replied, his voice filled with confusion. "But that's impossible. Intel confirmed this thing was a drone." The laughter came again, and this time it was accompanied by a voice that was definitely female and sounded far too relaxed for someone engaged in aerial combat. "Sorry about that, Apache 77. Couldn't resist seeing how you'd react to my little speed demonstration." Sarah and Thompson exchanged glances through their helmet visors. This was definitely not what they had been briefed to expect. "Red Team Control, this is Apache 77. Thompson spoke into his radio, requesting clarification on the nature of our opponent. "We're receiving voice transmissions that suggest a human pilot." There was a long pause before Red Team Control responded. "Apache 77, that information is classified. Continue with your mission as briefed." The experimental aircraft was now flying alongside them at a comfortable distance, matching their speed and altitude with ease. Through her targeting scope, Sarah could just make out what looked like a cockpit canopy, though the glare and the craft's adaptive camouflage made it difficult to see clearly. "Well, this is awkward." The female voice came through the radio again. "I'm Lieutenant Maria Santos, by the way. Call sign Phoenix. I guess nobody told you guys there was actually someone flying this thing." "Lieutenant Santos," Thompson replied formally. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Thompson, and my weapons officer is Captain Martinez. We were told we'd be engaging an unmanned experimental aircraft." "Oh, it's experimental, all right," Santos replied with another laugh. But unmanned? Not hardly. Though I suppose the people who built this thing would prefer if everyone thought it was just a clever computer program. Easier to maintain plausible deniability that way. Sarah found herself studying the aircraft more carefully, trying to understand what she was looking at. The technology on display was clearly years ahead of anything she had seen before, but knowing there was a human pilot aboard somehow made it less intimidating and more fascinating. So what exactly are we flying against? Sarah asked over the radio. Something that officially doesn't exist, Santos replied. But between us pilots, let's just say that certain government agencies have been working on some very interesting projects. This particular bird represents about 15 years of research into advanced propulsion systems and material science. The experimental aircraft suddenly pulled ahead of them and executed a series of maneuvers that no conventional aircraft could have performed. It seemed to dance through the air with impossible grace, turning in directions that defied everything Sarah knew about aerodynamics. Watching it was like seeing the future of aviation being written in real time. "How are you not dead?" Thompson asked bluntly. "Those maneuvers should have generated forces that would liquefy a human being." "Inertial compensation system," Santos replied casually. "The computer calculates the forces and generates an opposing field that cancels them out. I barely feel anything more than normal flight pressure." That's impossible," Sarah stammered. "So was powered flight. Once upon a time," Santos replied. "Yet here we are, several miles above the ground, defying gravity through the miracle of technology." The aircraft slowed down again and resumed flying alongside the Apache. Sarah could see Santos waving at them through what was definitely a cockpit window, though the exact shape and size of the opening seemed to shift and change as she watched. "The really interesting part," Santos continued, "is that this is just the prototype. The production models are supposed to be even more capable. Faster, more maneuverable, better stealth characteristics. Eventually, they want to build entire squadrons of these things." "What's the mission profile?" Thompson asked, his tactical mind already working on the implications of such technology. "Air superiority, primarily. But these birds can do a little bit of everything. Air-to-air, air-to-ground, reconnaissance, electronic warfare. The modular design means they can be reconfigured for different missions in a matter of hours." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she contemplated what this technology could mean for the future of aerial warfare. Aircraft like the Apache had dominated the battlefield for decades, but they would be obsolete overnight if this kind of technology became widespread. "Don't look so worried, Captain Martinez," Santos said, and Sarah realized the other pilot must be watching them through some kind of advanced optical system. "There's still a place for conventional aircraft. These things are incredibly expensive to build and maintain. For every one of these they can afford, they can probably buy 50 conventional helicopters or jets. Plus," Santos continued, "there's something to be said for having pilots who learn to fly on conventional aircraft. All this technology is amazing, but it can also become a crutch. Sometimes you need a pilot who can fly by instinct and experience, not just by computer assistance." The radio crackled as Red Team Control interrupted their conversation. "All aircraft, be advised that Phase 2 of the exercise is now commencing. Apache 7-7, you are now considered hostile. Red Team aircraft, you are cleared to engage." "Well," Santos said with obvious enthusiasm, "looks like the real fun is about to begin. Hope you two are ready for a challenge." The experimental aircraft suddenly accelerated away from them, climbing rapidly toward a higher altitude. Sarah watched it disappear into the glare of the sun, her instruments losing track of it completely. "Where did she go?" Sarah asked as she scanned the sky frantically. "She could be anywhere," Thompson replied grimly. "With that kind of stealth technology and speed, she could attack from any direction at any time." Sarah continued scanning the horizon, but she found herself thinking about the pilot they had just been talking to. Santos had sounded young, probably not much older than Sarah herself, but she was flying technology that was decades ahead of anything else in the sky. What kind of training did someone need to handle that kind of responsibility. Contact, Thompson shouted suddenly, coming in fast from 6 o'clock low. Sarah spun her targeting system around just in time to see the experimental aircraft streak past them again, this time close enough that she could feel the turbulence from its passage. But there was something different about this pass. Instead of the complete silence she expected, there was a sound, a low, musical tone that seemed to resonate through the Apache's hull. What was that sound? Sarah asked. I think she's playing with us, Thompson replied. Testing different capabilities, seeing how we react. The aircraft reappeared in front of them, hanging motionless in the air like it was suspended by invisible wires. Sarah had never seen anything maintain a perfect hover like that, without rotors or visible thrust vectoring. How are you doing that? She asked over the radio. Electromagnetic levitation, Santos replied cheerfully. Same principle as a maglev train, but applied to flight. The computer generates a localized magnetic field that interacts with the Earth's magnetic field. It's not very efficient for high-speed flight, but it's perfect for precision hovering. Sarah was about to respond when her threat warning system suddenly activated. The experimental aircraft had somehow achieved a target lock on them, without her even realizing it was engaging its weapon systems. Fox 2, Santos called out over the radio, using the standard radio call for a missile launch. But instead of missile, what came from the experimental aircraft was something Sarah had never seen before. It looked like a ball of light that moved with incredible speed and precision, leaving a glowing trail as it streaked toward the Apache. Deploying countermeasures, Thompson shouted as he launched flares and chaff to confuse incoming missiles. But the ball of light seemed completely unaffected by their countermeasures. It passed right through the defensive cloud and struck the Apache with a gentle impact that felt more like a pat on the shoulder than a weapons hit. Target hit confirmed. Red Team Control announced over the radio. Apache 7-7, you are considered destroyed. Return to base for debriefing. Sarah sat in stunned silence as Thompson began the flight back to Fort Hood. In all her years of combat flying, she had never been shot down so completely and efficiently. The experimental aircraft and its pilot had made the Apache look like a World War II relic. Don't take it personally, Captain, Santos said over the radio, her voice gentle now. This bird is designed to outclass anything currently flying. You handled yourselves well, all things considered. What was that weapon? Sarah asked, her professional curiosity overcoming her wounded pride. Directed energy system, Santos replied. Basically a focused electromagnetic pulse that can disable electronics without causing physical damage. In a real combat situation, it would have fried every circuit in your helicopter, but the training version just tags you for the exercise computers. As they flew back toward the base, Sarah found herself looking forward to the debriefing session. She had dozens of questions about the technology she had witnessed, and she sensed that Lieutenant Santos might be willing to share at least some of the answers. The landing at Fort Hood felt different somehow. Sarah had taken off that morning confident in her abilities and her aircraft. She was landing with the humbling knowledge that everything she thought she knew about aerial combat was about to change forever. But instead of feeling discouraged, she found herself excited by the possibilities. If this was the future of military aviation, then she wanted to be part of it. And something told her that her encounter with the mysterious Lieutenant Santos was just the beginning of a much larger story. The debriefing room at Fort Hood was unlike any Sarah had ever experienced. Instead of the usual sterile military conference room with folding chairs and fluorescent lights, she found herself in what looked more like a high-tech laboratory. Multiple screens covered the walls, displaying telemetry data, flight paths, and detailed analysis of every moment of their encounter with the experimental aircraft. The air hummed with the quiet energy of sophisticated computer systems processing enormous amounts of information. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson sat beside her at a curved table that seemed to be made from a single piece of some kind of advanced composite material. Across from them sat two people Sarah didn't recognize. A middle-aged man in civilian clothes who introduced himself as Dr. Richard Harrison, and a woman in an Air Force uniform with enough ribbons on her chest to indicate she was someone very important indeed. Colonel Patricia Voss had the bearing of someone who was used to being the smartest person in any room she entered. "Before we begin," Dr. Harrison said, opening a thick folder filled with documents, "I need both of you to understand that everything discussed in this room is classified at the highest levels. What you witness today represents technology that is years ahead of anything our potential adversaries possess, and it must remain that way." Sarah nodded, though her mind was racing with questions. The flight data being displayed on the screens around them showed impossible performance characteristics, acceleration rates that no known aircraft could achieve, maneuvers that defied the laws of physics, and energy signatures that didn't match anything in the military's databases. "The aircraft you encountered is designated the XF-47 Phantom," Colonel Voss explained, her voice crisp and professional. "It represents the culmination of a black-budget research program that has been in development for over 15 years. What makes it unique isn't just its performance characteristics, but the pilot who flies it." "Lieutenant Santos," Sarah said. She mentioned that the aircraft officially doesn't exist. "That's correct," Dr. Harrison replied. "And neither does she, for all practical purposes." Lieutenant Maria Santos was selected for this program from a pool of over 1,000 candidates. She underwent 3 years of specialized training and physical modification to be able to interface directly with the aircraft systems. Thompson leaned forward in his chair. "Physical modification?" Colonel Voss exchanged a glance with Dr. Harrison before continuing. "The forces generated by the XF-47's advanced maneuvering capabilities would kill any normal human being. Lieutenant Santos has undergone a series of procedures that allow her to survive acceleration forces that would liquefy a conventional pilot. Neural implants that help her process information at superhuman speeds. Enhanced reflexes and reaction times. She's as much a part of the aircraft as any other component." Sarah felt a chill run through her as she processed this information. The cheerful, laughing voice she had heard over the radio belonged to someone who was no longer entirely human. "What kind of procedures?" "That information is classified above your clearance level," Dr. Harrison said firmly. "What I can tell you is that the process was voluntary, and Lieutenant Santos was fully informed of the risks and consequences." The screens around them showed a detailed playback of their aerial encounter, with the flight path of both aircraft displayed in 3 dimensions. Sarah could see exactly how completely they had been outmaneuvered. The XF-47 had never been in any real danger from their weapons, even if they had been firing live ammunition. "The question now," Colonel Voss said, "is what we do with this technology going forward. The XF-47 program has proven that such aircraft are not only possible, but practical. The question is whether we begin full-scale production." "What's stopping you?" Thompson asked. "Cost, for one thing," Dr. Harrison replied. "Each XF-47 costs approximately 10 times what it would take to build an entire squadron of conventional fighter aircraft. But more importantly, we can only build them as fast as we can train pilots to fly them." Sarah understood immediately. "The modification process. How long does it take?" 18 months, minimum," Colonel Voss said. "And that's assuming the candidate survives the procedures. We've lost more potential pilots than we've successfully modified." The room fell silent as the implications of that statement sank in. The technology was incredible, but the human cost was staggering. Sarah found herself thinking about Lieutenant Santos, wondering what she had sacrificed to become part of this program. "There is another option," Dr. Harrison said, breaking the silence. "Semi-autonomous systems. We could build aircraft that combine human decision-making with computer-controlled flight systems. The pilot would handle strategy and tactics, while the computer manages the physical stresses of advanced maneuvering. Like the experimental aircraft that we thought was unmanned," Sarah said, understanding beginning to dawn. "Exactly. The XF-47 already has such systems. Lieutenant Santos doesn't actually control every aspect of the aircraft's flight. She provides high-level commands, and the computer translates those into specific control inputs. It's a partnership between human intuition and machine precision. Colonel Voss activated one of the wall screens, which began displaying what looked like recruitment profiles. We're looking for pilots to participate in the next phase of testing. Volunteers who would be willing to undergo a modified version of the enhancement process, less invasive than what Lieutenant Santos experienced, but still requiring significant commitment. Sarah stared at the profiles, recognizing several names of pilots she knew and respected. These were some of the best aviators in the military, people with combat experience and proven records of excellence under pressure. What exactly would be required? Thompson asked. Neural interface implants, Dr. Harrison explained. They would allow direct communication between the pilot's nervous system and the aircraft's control systems. Think of it as the ultimate in fly-by-wire technology. Instead of moving a control stick that sends electronic signals to control surfaces, your thoughts would directly command the aircraft's movements. The training process would take approximately 1 year, Colonel Voss added. 6 months of medical procedures and recovery, followed by 6 months of flight training on progressively more advanced aircraft. Candidates would retain their current rank and pay grade, with significant bonuses for successful completion of the program. Sarah found herself studying the technical specifications displayed on another screen. The capabilities of the modified aircraft were breathtaking. Sustained speeds of over Mach 4, the ability to operate at altitudes above 80,000 feet, and maneuverability that made conventional fighters look like they were standing still. What about the risks? She asked. Dr. Harrison's expression grew serious. Approximately 30% of candidates experience complications during the implantation process. Most of these are minor, temporary disorientation, mild neurological side effects that resolve within a few weeks. But about 5% experience severe complications that can result in permanent disability or death. And if the process is successful, then you become part of the most advanced military aviation program in human history, Colonel Voss said. You would fly aircraft that are decades ahead of anything our enemies possess, with capabilities that border on science fiction. Sarah looked at Thompson, seeing her own conflict reflected in his expression. The opportunity was incredible, but the risks were real and serious. This wasn't just about learning to fly a new type of aircraft. It was about fundamentally changing what it meant to be a pilot. There's something else you should know, Dr. Harrison said, seeming to read their thoughts. The modifications are permanent. Once you undergo the neural interface implantation, you can never go back to flying conventional aircraft. Your nervous system becomes adapted to the enhanced interface, and standard flight controls would feel impossibly clumsy and unresponsive. So it's a one-way door, Thompson said. Yes, that's why the selection process is so rigorous. We need pilots who are not only technically qualified, but psychologically prepared for what amounts to a complete career transformation. Colonel Voss activated another screen that showed a world map dotted with various markers. The geopolitical situation is changing rapidly. Our intelligence indicates that both China and Russia are working on their own advanced aircraft programs. We believe they're at least 5 years behind us, but that advantage won't last forever. We need pilots trained on these systems before our technological edge disappears. Sarah studied the map, noting the concentration of markers in certain regions. It was clear that the military was preparing for conflicts that would be unlike anything they had faced before. Wars fought with weapons and technology that sounded more like science fiction than reality. How many pilots are you looking to recruit? Thompson asked. Initially, 12, Dr. Harrison replied. 4 for the XF-47 program. 4 for a new helicopter-based system built around Apache airframes with enhanced capabilities, and 4 for a naval aviation program involving modified carrier-based aircraft. Apache airframes? Sarah's interest was immediately piqued. The Apache had been her life for the past 6 years, and the idea of flying an enhanced version was incredibly appealing. The AH-64X Phoenix, Colonel Voss explained, activating a screen that showed what looked like an Apache helicopter that had been redesigned by someone with access to alien technology. All the firepower and versatility of a conventional Apache, but with advanced propulsion systems, stealth capabilities, and the kind of performance characteristics you witness today. The images on the screen were breathtaking. The modified Apache retained the basic shape and configuration that Sarah knew and loved, but every surface had been refined and enhanced. The rotor system looked completely different, with blades that seemed to shift and change shape as they rotated. The entire aircraft had a sleek, predatory appearance that made conventional helicopters look like antiques. The Phoenix can operate at altitudes up to 25,000 feet, Dr. Harrison continued. Maximum speed of over 400 miles per hour, with the ability to hover silently using electromagnetic levitation systems similar to what you experience today. Range is approximately 800 miles on internal fuel, with the option for aerial refueling to extend that indefinitely. What about weapons systems? Sarah asked, her tactical mind already working on the possibilities. Enhanced versions of everything the conventional Apache carries, plus some new options, Colonel Voss replied. The 30mm chain gun has been replaced with a directed energy weapon system. Hellfire missiles have been supplemented with electromagnetic pulse warheads and kinetic energy penetrators, plus stealth capabilities that make the aircraft virtually invisible to conventional radar and infrared detection systems. Sarah felt her pulse quickening as she absorbed the technical specifications. This wasn't just an upgrade to existing technology, it was a complete revolution in what a helicopter could be and do. The Phoenix would be capable of missions that no conventional aircraft could even attempt. The selection process begins tomorrow, Dr. Harrison said, handing each of them a thick packet of documents. Medical examinations, psychological evaluations, technical assessments, and interviews with the program leadership. The entire process takes approximately 2 weeks, and candidates are not permitted to discuss any aspect of it with anyone not directly involved in the program. Thompson was flipping through his packet, scanning the pages of technical specifications and requirements. What's the timeline if someone is selected? Medical procedures begin immediately upon acceptance, Colonel Voss replied. We found that delay increases the psychological stress on candidates and reduces the success rate of the enhancement process. Once you commit completely. Sarah found herself staring at a photograph in her packet that showed Lieutenant Santos standing beside the XF-47. The pilot looked completely normal, young, confident, with the kind of easy smile that belonged on recruiting posters. But knowing what she had undergone to be able to fly that aircraft made the image somehow unsettling. Can we meet with Lieutenant Santos? Sarah asked. I'd like to hear directly from someone who's been through the process what it's really like. Dr. Harrison and Colonel Voss exchanged another glance. That's complicated, Dr. Harrison said finally. Lieutenant Santos is currently on a classified mission that will keep her out of the country for several weeks. And even if she were available, her security clearance restrictions limit who she can speak with about her experiences. However, Colonel Voss added, we do have video testimonials from pilots who have successfully completed various phases of the enhancement programs. Those are included in your information packets, along with detailed medical information about the procedures and their effects. Sarah nodded, though she found herself disappointed. Hearing Santos's voice over the radio had made the pilot seem real and approachable, despite the incredible technology she commanded. Video testimonials would provide information, but they wouldn't give her the kind of personal insight she was looking for. There is one more thing, Dr. Harrison said as they prepared to leave. The selection process is competitive. We have slots for 12 pilots, but we're evaluating over 50 candidates. Academic performance, psychological stability, technical aptitude, and leadership potential all factor into the final decisions. No pressure, Thompson muttered under his breath, earning a slight smile from Colonel Voss. The military has always been about pushing the boundaries of what's possible, she said. This program represents the next step in that evolution. We're not just looking for pilots. We're looking for pioneers who will define the future of military aviation. As they left the debriefing room, Sarah found herself walking in silence beside Thompson. The corridor they moved through was different from the rest of the base, with walls that seemed to absorb sound and lighting that automatically adjusted to their presence. Everything about this place spoke of advanced technology and unlimited resources. "What do you think?" Thompson asked as they approached the exit. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "that everything we thought we knew about flying is about to change forever." They stepped outside into the Texas afternoon heat, but Sarah barely noticed the temperature. Her mind was spinning with the possibilities and implications of what she had learned. The Apache had been the pinnacle of helicopter technology for decades, but the Phoenix represented something entirely new, an aircraft that combined the best of conventional design with technology that seemed to come from the future. "Are you going to apply?" Thompson asked. Sarah looked back at the building they had just left, thinking about Lieutenant Santos and the sound of her laughter as she effortlessly outmaneuvered the most advanced attack helicopter in the world. The risks were real, but so was the opportunity to be part of something unprecedented in military history. "Yeah," she said finally, "I think I am." That evening, Sarah sat in her quarters reading through the information packet for the third time. The medical procedures were described in clinical detail that made them sound both fascinating and terrifying. Neural interface implants that would allow direct control of aircraft systems. Enhanced reflexes through carefully controlled genetic modifications. Sensory augmentation that would let pilots process information at superhuman speeds. But it was the personal testimonials that captured her attention most. Pilots who had undergone various levels of enhancement, describing the experience of flying aircraft that responded to their thoughts as naturally as their own bodies. The sense of unity between human and machine that went beyond anything conventional pilots could imagine. One testimonial particularly stuck with her. A Navy pilot who had undergone the enhancement process for the carrier-based program described flying as becoming one with the sky itself. He talked about the loss of the boundary between pilot and aircraft, where thinking about a maneuver was the same as executing it. But he also spoke honestly about the costs. The months of medical procedures and recovery. The psychological adjustment to having artificial components integrated into his nervous system. The knowledge that he could never go back to being entirely human again. Sarah closed the packet and stared out her window at the flight line, where conventional helicopters sat waiting for tomorrow's training missions. In a few weeks, she might be leaving all of this behind for something that was barely recognizable as the same profession. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Good luck with your decision, Captain Martinez. The sky is about to get a lot more interesting. MS." Sarah stared at the message, realizing that somehow Lieutenant Santos had managed to send her a personal note despite being on a classified mission in an undisclosed location. The technology that allowed such communication was probably classified at levels she couldn't even imagine. But the message itself was encouraging. Santos had reached out to her personally, pilot to pilot, offering support for what she knew would be the most difficult decision of Sarah's career. Sarah picked up her pen and began filling out the application forms for the Phoenix program. Whatever happened next, she was ready to find out what it meant to be a pilot in an age of impossible machines and enhanced human capabilities. 8 months later, Captain Sarah Martinez stood in a hangar that officially didn't exist, staring at an aircraft that challenged every assumption she had ever made about the limitations of flight. The AH-64X Phoenix looked like someone had taken the Apache helicopter she loved and reimagined it using technology borrowed from science fiction. The familiar outline was still there, but every surface had been refined and enhanced with materials that seemed to shift and change color in the hangar's specialized lighting. The neural interface surgery had been completed 3 weeks ago, and Sarah was still adjusting to the strange sensations that came with having artificial components integrated into her nervous system. The small ports behind her ears were barely visible beneath her hair, but she could feel them constantly, a reminder that she was no longer entirely human. The recovery process had been more difficult than the medical team had predicted, with periods of disorientation and sensory overload that left her questioning her decision to volunteer for the program. But standing in front of the Phoenix, watching technicians perform final systems checks on the most advanced helicopter ever built, Sarah felt a thrill of anticipation that made all the pain and uncertainty worthwhile. Today would be her first solo flight in the enhanced aircraft, the culmination of months of training that had pushed her abilities beyond anything she had thought possible. Nervous? The voice belonged to Major Lisa Chun, the Phoenix program's chief test pilot, and the only person who had more flight hours in enhanced aircraft than Lieutenant Santos. Chun had been Sarah's primary instructor throughout the training process, guiding her through the complex integration of human intuition and machine precision that defined the new generation of military aircraft. Excited, Sarah replied honestly. I've been dreaming about this moment for months. Chun smiled, understanding exactly what Sarah meant. Every pilot who had successfully completed the enhancement process described the first solo flight as a transformative experience, the moment when the theoretical capabilities of the aircraft became visceral reality. Remember everything we've discussed about neural integration, Chun said as they walked around the Phoenix, performing the pre-flight inspection that had become second nature. Don't try to control the aircraft like a conventional helicopter. Think of it as extending your own body. The interface will translate your intentions into specific control inputs more efficiently than any conscious process could manage. Sarah nodded, running her hands along the Phoenix's adaptive armor plating. The surface felt warm and slightly textured, almost organic in its responsiveness. She could sense electronic systems humming with power beneath the skin of the aircraft, waiting to merge with her own enhanced nervous system. The Phoenix carried a full combat loadout for today's test flight: directed energy weapons, electromagnetic pulse warheads, and kinetic penetrators that could punch through any known armor. But, more importantly, it represented the evolution of helicopter warfare into something that bore little resemblance to the aircraft Sarah had trained on years earlier. The target range has been configured for advanced maneuvering tests, Chun explained as they climbed into the cockpit. We'll be evaluating your integration with the aircraft's enhanced systems under combat conditions. Multiple pop-up targets, electronic warfare scenarios, and some surprises that I won't spoil by describing. Sarah settled into the pilot's seat, which immediately began conforming to her body shape using materials that responded to pressure and temperature. The moment she placed her hands on the control interfaces, she felt the neural link engage with a sensation like electricity running along her spine. The cockpit displays came alive with information fed directly to her enhanced nervous system, creating a level of situational awareness that no conventional pilot could achieve. Phoenix 7-1, this is Control Tower, came the voice through her headset. You're cleared for takeoff when ready. But Sarah barely heard the radio transmission. Her attention was focused on the extraordinary sensation of the Phoenix's systems integrating with her own enhanced reflexes and decision-making processes. She could feel the aircraft's engines as if they were her own heartbeat, sense the rotor blades cutting through the air with the precision of her own fingers. The helicopter lifted off the ground with a smoothness that defied physics. There was no vibration, no sense of mechanical systems working hard to overcome gravity. The Phoenix simply decided to rise, and reality adjusted accordingly. Sarah felt herself smiling as they climbed above the hangar, the landscape spreading out below them like a living map. How does it feel? Chun asked over the intercom, though her voice seemed to come from inside Sarah's own thoughts rather than through the conventional radio system. Like flying in a dream, Sarah replied, discovering that she didn't need to speak aloud for Chun to hear her. The neural interface allowed direct communication between enhanced pilots, creating a level of coordination that conventional crews could never achieve. They flew toward the test range in comfortable silence, with Sarah gradually pushing the Phoenix's capabilities to higher levels. The aircraft responded to her intentions with an immediacy that made conventional control systems seem impossibly slow and clumsy. When she thought about turning left, the helicopter began the maneuver before she had consciously decided to move. When she wanted to climb, the Phoenix anticipated her desires and adjusted power settings automatically. First target range coming up, Chin announced as they approached a valley filled with sophisticated threat simulators and pop-up targets. Remember, this isn't about accuracy with weapon systems. It's about integration between human tactical thinking and machine execution. The first target appeared without warning, a simulated missile battery that emerged from concealment and immediately began tracking their approach. In a conventional Apache, Sarah would have had to consciously identify the threat, select appropriate countermeasures, and execute evasive maneuvers while simultaneously engaging the target with her own weapons. But the Phoenix transformed the engagement into something that felt more like a dance than a battle. The aircraft's threat assessment systems fed information directly to Sarah's enhanced nervous system, creating an intuitive understanding of the tactical situation that bypassed conscious analysis. She found herself executing a complex series of evasive maneuvers while simultaneously engaging the target with directed energy weapons, all without making any conscious decisions about specific control inputs. Target destroyed, control announced over the radio. Time from threat detection to engagement, 1.2 seconds. Sarah felt a surge of exhilaration that was immediately tempered by the realization of what such capability meant. The Phoenix hadn't just destroyed the simulated target. It had done so faster than any human pilot should have been able to process the information, identify the threat, and respond appropriately. That's the point, Chin said, apparently sensing Sarah's thoughts through the neural link. The aircraft doesn't just amplify your existing capabilities. It allows you to operate at levels that pure human intelligence could never achieve. The next series of targets was more complex, requiring simultaneous engagement of multiple threats while navigating through simulated anti-aircraft fire. Sarah found herself moving through three-dimensional space with a fluidity that seemed to mock the laws of physics, the Phoenix responding to her tactical intentions with movements that conventional helicopters simply couldn't execute. But it was during the third engagement that something unexpected happened. A new target appeared on the range. Not one of the simulated threats they had been briefed to expect, but an actual aircraft moving at high speed toward their position. Phoenix 7-1, be advised that we have an unscheduled visitor, Control announced, though Sarah could hear tension in the controller's voice. Experimental aircraft approaching from the southwest, requesting permission to join your exercise. Sarah immediately recognized the distinctive shape of the XF-47 as it streaked toward them at impossible speed. The aircraft that had so completely outclassed her and Thompson 8 months earlier was now approaching for what appeared to be an impromptu test of capabilities between the two most advanced aircraft in the American military. "Sarah," came a familiar voice over the radio. "It's Maria Santos. Mind if I see what that new bird of yours can do?" Sarah felt her pulse quicken at the sound of Santos's voice. The XF-47 pilot had become something of a legend during Sarah's training, spoken of in whispers as the first person to successfully integrate with technology that pushed the boundaries of what it meant to be human. "Permission granted," Chin replied for both of them. "But let's keep this friendly. We're testing integration capabilities, not trying to prove superiority." The XF-47 slowed as it approached their position, matching the Phoenix's speed and altitude with the casual precision that had so impressed Sarah during their first encounter. Through her enhanced visual systems, Sarah could see Santos in the cockpit of the experimental aircraft, though the pilot's face was partially obscured by equipment that looked more like a space suit than conventional flight gear. "Nice bird," Santos said over the radio. "I've been following the Phoenix program's development. The integration of helicopter agility with fixed-wing performance characteristics is brilliant." Sarah found herself studying the XF-47 with her enhanced visual systems, noting details that would have been invisible to conventional eyesight. The aircraft's skin seemed to pulse with energy, shifting color and texture in response to changing flight conditions. She could see weapon ports that opened and closed with liquid smoothness, and propulsion systems that defied easy categorization. "Want to try a little friendly competition?" Santos asked, and Sarah could hear the same laughing tone that had surprised her 8 months earlier. "Nothing dangerous, just a test of maneuvering capabilities." "What did you have in mind?" Sarah replied, discovering that her enhanced nervous system was already analyzing potential engagement scenarios and feeding tactical options directly to her consciousness. "Follow the leader," Santos replied. "I'll set a course through some interesting terrain, and we'll see if that helicopter of yours can keep up with a pure aerospace vehicle." Without waiting for a response, the XF-47 suddenly accelerated toward a series of mesas and canyons that would provide challenging navigation for any aircraft. Sarah found herself reacting instinctively, the Phoenix responding to her intentions with movements that seemed to bend the laws of aerodynamics. What followed was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. The two aircraft wove through terrain that would have been impossible for conventional helicopters or jets to navigate, executing maneuvers that challenged every assumption about flight dynamics. The Phoenix flowed through narrow canyons like water, while the XF-47 demonstrated an ability to change direction that seemed to ignore inertia entirely. "Your integration is better than I expected," Santos commented over the radio as they emerged from a particularly challenging series of turns. "The Phoenix systems are responding to your intentions with remarkable precision." Sarah felt a surge of pride at the compliment, but she was also aware that Santos was deliberately moderating her own aircraft performance to allow the Phoenix to keep up. The XF-47 was clearly capable of speeds and maneuvers that would leave the helicopter far behind, despite its advanced capabilities. "Let me show you something interesting," Santos said, and suddenly the XF-47 simply vanished from Sarah's sensors. "Where did she go?" Sarah asked, scanning the sky frantically with both conventional and enhanced visual systems. "Active camouflage," Chen replied. "The XF-47 can bend light around itself to achieve optical invisibility. It's one of the technologies we're working on integrating into the next generation of Phoenix aircraft." Sarah continued searching for any sign of the experimental aircraft, but it had disappeared as completely as if it had never existed. Her enhanced sensors could detect no trace of its presence, despite knowing that it had to be somewhere in the immediate vicinity. Then Santos's voice came through the radio again, but this time it seemed to be coming from directly above them. "The key is not to rely entirely on technology," she said. "Sometimes the most advanced sensors can be fooled by relatively simple tactics." Sarah looked up and saw nothing but empty sky, but something about the lights seemed wrong, a subtle distortion that her enhanced vision finally resolved into the outline of the XF-47 hanging motionless about 100 feet above them. "Impressive," Sarah said. "How long can you maintain optical camouflage?" "Indefinitely, as long as I'm not maneuvering aggressively," Santos replied. "The system works by projecting the image from one side of the aircraft onto the opposite side. As long as I'm stationary or moving slowly, observers see through the aircraft rather than seeing the aircraft itself." The XF-47 gradually became visible again as Santos disengaged the camouflage system. Sarah watched in fascination as the aircraft seemed to materialize out of empty air, like something from a science fiction movie becoming reality. "The Phoenix will have similar capabilities eventually," Chen explained. "But the current priority is perfecting the integration between pilot and aircraft. Stealth technology is easier to implement than neural interface systems." They spent the next hour engaged in various exercises that tested the limits of both aircraft and their enhanced pilots. Sarah found herself pushed beyond anything she had experienced during training, executing maneuvers that would have been impossible without the neural interface linking her intentions directly to the aircraft's control systems. But it was during the final exercise that something went wrong. They were practicing high-speed intercept scenarios when Sarah felt a sudden sharp pain behind her right ear, followed by a disorienting wave of sensory overload. The neural interface began feeding her conflicting information, creating a dangerous confusion between her enhanced senses and her natural perception. Neural integration malfunction, she reported, fighting to maintain control of the Phoenix as competing sensory inputs threatened to overwhelm her consciousness. I'm getting conflicting data from the interface systems. Emergency landing protocols activated. Chen replied immediately, her voice sharp with concern. Sarah, I need you to disengage from the neural interface and switch to manual control. But disengaging proved more difficult than expected. The neural interface had become so thoroughly integrated with Sarah's nervous system that separating her consciousness from the aircraft systems felt like trying to amputate part of her own mind. The Phoenix began responding erratically to the conflicting signals, its smooth flight becoming unstable and dangerous. Phoenix 7-1, this is Santos, came the XF-47 pilot's voice over the radio. I'm moving to intercept position. If you lose control completely, I can use electromagnetic fields to stabilize your aircraft remotely. Sarah struggled to process this information through the chaos of malfunctioning neural signals. The idea that Santos could somehow control the Phoenix from her own aircraft should have been impossible, but she was learning that impossibility was a flexible concept when dealing with this level of technology. Attempting manual override, Sarah managed to say, though speaking required enormous concentration. The neural interface was feeding her sensory information from the aircraft systems at a rate that human consciousness couldn't process, creating a feedback loop that threatened to shut down her enhanced nervous system entirely. Then, suddenly, the chaos stopped. The overwhelming flow of information cut off, as if someone had thrown a switch, leaving Sarah in control of the Phoenix that was flying with conventional mechanical systems rather than the integrated neural interface. Emergency disconnect successful, Chen reported. Sarah, how do you feel? Sarah took a moment to assess her condition, surprised to discover that she felt remarkably normal considering what had just happened. I'm okay. What caused the malfunction? Unknown, Chen replied. We'll need to do a complete analysis of both your neural implants and the aircraft's interface systems. But right now, let's get you safely on the ground. As they flew back toward the base using conventional flight controls, Sarah found herself reflecting on what the malfunction had revealed about the technology she had volunteered to integrate with her own nervous system. The neural interface had become so thoroughly connected to her consciousness that separating from it felt like losing part of herself. That's the biggest challenge with this technology, Santos said over the radio, apparently sensing her thoughts. The integration becomes so complete that the boundary between pilot and aircraft starts to disappear. When it works perfectly, it's the most incredible experience imaginable. But when something goes wrong, you lose yourself, Sarah finished. Exactly. That's why the psychological evaluation process is so rigorous. We need pilots who can maintain their sense of self even when they're integrated with systems that operate beyond human limitations. They landed at the base without further incident, though Sarah noticed that both aircraft were immediately surrounded by technical teams who began intensive diagnostics of every system. The neural interface malfunction had apparently triggered security protocols that treated any technological failure as a potential threat to the entire program. Dr. Harrison appeared within minutes of their landing, his face showing the kind of concern that came from knowing exactly how dangerous the technology they were working with could be. Captain Martinez, how are you feeling? Like I just had part of my brain temporarily disconnected, Sarah replied honestly. It was disturbing. We'll need to run a complete neurological assessment, Dr. Harrison said. Neural interface malfunctions are rare, but they can have lasting effects if not properly addressed. As Sarah was escorted to the medical facility for evaluation, she found herself walking beside Santos, who had emerged from the XF-47 looking remarkably normal despite piloting technology that seemed to belong in a science fiction movie. How do you handle it? Sarah asked. The integration, the risk, knowing that you're no longer entirely human? Santos was quiet for a moment before responding. I think about what this technology makes possible, she said finally. The ability to defend against threats that conventional aircraft couldn't even detect, let alone engage. The potential to save lives by being faster, more accurate, more capable than any enemy can match. But what about the personal cost? Santos stopped walking and turned to face Sarah directly. Every pilot makes sacrifices for their mission. We risk our lives every time we take off, accept assignments that separate us from our families, dedicate ourselves to something larger than our own comfort and safety. This is just a different kind of sacrifice. Sarah nodded, understanding what Santos meant, but still struggling with the implications of technology that changed not just what pilots could do, but who they fundamentally were. The neurological assessment will probably show that the malfunction was a minor glitch in the interface software, Santos continued. The hardware integration with your nervous system is almost certainly fine, but Dr. Harrison will want to run tests to be absolutely certain. They had reached the medical facility where teams of specialists waited to begin the evaluation process. Sarah paused at the entrance, looking back toward the hangar where the Phoenix waited for whatever modifications would be necessary to prevent future malfunctions. Santos, she said, do you ever miss being entirely human? The other pilot smiled, and Sarah heard that same laugh that had surprised her 8 months earlier during their first encounter. I miss some things, Santos admitted, but I wouldn't trade this for anything. Flying these aircraft, being part of this program, helping to define the future of military aviation, it's worth whatever it costs. Sarah spent the next 3 hours undergoing the most comprehensive medical examination of her life. Every aspect of her enhanced nervous system was tested and analyzed, from the neural implants behind her ears to the modified reflexes that allowed her to process information at superhuman speeds. But the results were encouraging. The malfunction had been caused by a software incompatibility between her neural interface and a recent upgrade to the Phoenix's control systems. Her actual neural implants were functioning perfectly, and there was no indication of any permanent damage from the temporary disconnection. You'll be cleared for flight operations again tomorrow, Dr. Harrison informed her as the evaluation concluded. But we'll be implementing additional safeguards to prevent similar malfunctions in the future. As Sarah walked back to her quarters that evening, she reflected on the day's events and what they had taught her about the path she had chosen. The technology was incredible, offering capabilities that transformed what it meant to be a pilot. But it also carried risks and costs that went beyond anything conventional military aviation demanded. Yet standing in her quarters, looking out at the flight line where the Phoenix waited for tomorrow's missions, Sarah felt no regrets about her decision to volunteer for the program. She was part of something unprecedented in human history, the evolution of military aviation into something that combined human intuition with machine precision in ways that previous generations couldn't have imagined. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Lieutenant Santos. "Welcome to the future of flying, Sarah. It's going to be an interesting ride." Sarah smiled as she read the message, knowing that Santos was right. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever sacrifices would be required, she was exactly where she belonged, at the cutting edge of technology that would define the next century of human conflict and cooperation. Tomorrow she would fly again, pushing the boundaries of what was possible when human consciousness merged with machines that defied the laws of physics. And despite the risks, despite the costs, despite the knowledge that she was no longer entirely human, Sarah Martinez couldn't wait to get back in the air.